What is up, everybody? Excuse me. What is up, everybody? My name is Alex. Welcome to The Broth, the most fun, serious show on the internet. We are here live in the Cauldron, and today we're going to do a part 2 of Little Season Eschatology and post-millennialism. There's so much here. Definitely could talk about it for another hour or two easily. Yeah, it's gonna be fun. This image here, created with Grok image creation based on New Jerusalem in Revelation, the description of it. I think it came out pretty dope. So, going to be a little bit of an informal show. I'm just going to kind of go back over some stuff. We'll talk about, we'll take a look into a little bit more of those videos and stuff that I showed you yesterday. This is such a big and groundbreaking topic. It's such a bold and wild claim. I love it that the millennial reign already happened. Now, I had been thinking for the last few years that the millennial reign happened, but there was a couple things that I did not believe until recently. One of those was that the second coming happened, but I just didn't understand the order of when things are supposed to happen. The second coming precedes the millennial reign. It starts it off. So it goes, Jesus is born, has his lives his life, is crucified, dies, chains up Satan in hell for 1,000 years, resurrects. I think, although it might be, this is a little bit my interpretation that he chains him there. I've been assuming that that's where it happens, but maybe it's the second coming that he comes and does that. And then we have, might as well do this. Maybe when I get some viewers, I'll do this for real. But this show is brought to you by Alp. Alp are nicotine pouches, and I've tried all of them, and this one's by far the best. 6 milligrams. What's good about them is that they're not flat, so they don't fold over. They stick right where you want them to be, and they got a little moisture in there, so it doesn't dry your mouth out. And the flavors are great. See how it's like a little chunk? It's not a little flat thing. So yeah, one of these days you will be making the big dollars, probably. Slinging Alps. Now, nicotine might be addictive, but there's a lot of stuff coming up. It actually has health benefits for you, so it's kind of cool. But yeah, that's, I'm not going to keep doing that for free. But that is what I'm popping in my mouth every show. And I'm a big fan. Big fan. So yeah, as I was saying, I didn't realize the order of operations here in the Bible that's laid out very clear. Now, there are some things that maybe aren't totally clear, but I think most people understand, and I now understand, that you have the resurrection followed at some point by the tribulation, and then the second coming, and then the millennial reign. And Christ, the only reason we think that it didn't happen already is because we didn't know that. As far as we know, there's not evidence of that. Nobody seems to think that. Nobody talks about it that way. We were always taught that, sort of the biblical time that we live in is like Christ happened a long time ago, and a long time in the future he'll come again, and he's relevant in terms of our salvation, but like not really that relevant in terms of where we are in history. That seems like patent nonsense to me. Sounds like something the devil would pull. And then we have just this there's just scripture that we have to deal with. And this is the source of the issue, is if we believe the Bible is the Word of God, we have to believe what it says. And particularly give weight to what Christ says. Now, if we want to, people act like it's the same thing. People act like because there are psalms where it uses poetic and metaphorical language, then we could just treat anything like a poet, like a love poem, that King David wrote or something. No, this is just you have to reckon with this, and you either believe Jesus and take him at his word. Dear James Bible, Matthew 24, 34. What are we doing with this? And he shall send his angels with a trumpet and a great voice, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from the farthest parts of heavens to the utmost bounds of them. And this is not Revelations, by the way. This is the Gospel of Matthew. He is speaking to this isn't John retelling his crazy, wild visions of end times into a book. This is Christ talking to his living apostles who are standing on the ground, in their sandals in front of him. And from the fig tree, learn a parable. When the branch thereof is now tender and the leaves come forth, you know the summer is nigh. So you also, when you shall see all these things, know ye that it is nigh, even at the doors. Amen, I say to you, that this generation shall not pass till all these things are done. Heaven and earth shall pass, but my words shall not pass. Now, what are these things? Well, he just got done talking about the tribulation and the kingdom. Right here, 21. For there shall be then a great tribulation. He describes the tribulation. If the days hadn't been shortened, everyone would die. But for the sake of the elect of those days shall be shortened. It always takes me a little bit to be able to talk when I start these, or maybe it's permanent. Then if any man shall say to you, Lo, here is Christ, do not believe them. So we read this yesterday. If therefore I say to you, behold, he is in the desert, go not out. He's talking about false prophets. And I came across yesterday the idea that there's false prophets in the Old Testament, but there's the false prophet of the New Testament. And we're trying to rework some of our chronology, which I always thought was way more solid than it is. This was a huge revelation to me. Just all this stuff aside, what we grew up being told about how solid it is that say Julius Caesar existed in the year that we call it, and the amount of years ago from now that we call it is based on way less information than I was aware of. So, but there are things that we know. So we have the Bible and we have hard evidence. One of the things we have hard evidence for was that this happened. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun shall be darkened and the moon shall not give her light. The stars shall fall from heaven. Now that part they don't say we have evidence of, but the sun darkened in the year 536, I'm pretty sure it was. They talk about how the sun was darkened. And so we're re-looking at our history and we're finding, as I said, it's quite dubious. And we've looked at a historian that has, very credentialed German historian, Gunnar Heinzen. This is his lecture that we were watching yesterday. We'll watch a little bit more. He's claiming that 700 years were inserted into our history, that the cataclysm of 536 actually happened in the first century AD, and that even a cataclysm in the 800s was the same one. And before him, at least before I knew about him, there was this Russian, it was before him because he was decades ago. There was a Russian guy who was again, highly credentialed scholar and university professor, mainly in mathematics, whose name is Fomenko, Anatolia Fomenko, I believe it is. And he said he gets a little bit more extreme with his revision of the timeline, but I haven't looked that far into it. I haven't read his work yet. I get the sense that what he was actually saying isn't as extreme as it's often. It's still pretty still pretty out there, but that he's not making as strong of claims as is people say about him. Because if you exaggerate his claims, then people hear about, well, what did he say, and then they just dismiss it. But he is also talking about uh, the dragging out. So like if history was like a stick of bubble gum or something, stretching it over way more time than it actually was. And so I've been looking at what he was saying and how it was off, and he was doing some interesting things where he was looking at astrological events like eclipses, and you can track, when eclipses happened, going as far forward or backward as you want because it's consistent. And so he was doing stuff like that, and he came to the conclusion that our history is not quite off from what it was. He put extra years in the other direction. So instead of saying we are closer to the year of Christ, so therefore we're maybe in the 1300s now, which if you're just joining me, it's going to sound pretty crazy. What he's saying is that that Christ lived in like 1100. And so where am I going with all this? Oh, so I'm looking at scripture here, and it says immediately after tribulation, the sun shall be darkened. And we're looking at history and how it seems to be drawn out, and we're coming to the conclusion that this cataclysm in the year 500s, where multiple volcanoes go off at the same time, causing the world's skies to be darkened, was this. It was the tribulation. And that a great number of things that we're told happened between the year zero, or let's say the resurrection, and like 1000 AD happened in the first century or first few. And what happens when you do that is you have continuity in history that it fits way better. It's crazy. So like we're told like you have the fall of Rome because of barbarians, and they became very decadent. But the cities were demolished. They were like, there's cities that ended up under swamps. There's huge, you guys know how Roman buildings are, massive structures of marble, blasted into smithereens. Nobody bothers to explain how any number of barbarians could do that or would do that, or why would they do that? The barbarians take over Rome. If I'm taking over Rome with my horde, I'm taking those buildings and enjoying them. And, some of you were like, many of us have been questioning the idea that the Germanic tribes were these barbaric peoples, and notice that they get slandered over and over again throughout history. So it's very interesting stuff. So yes, the arc of history here, what we have is the Roman Empire. We have the coming of Christ. He says, he says like, I'll be right back. There's going to be a tribulation. Then I'm coming back. And there's Armageddon, which destroyed everything. And then I'm starting my kingdom. So like Rome didn't fall over hundreds of years, and it didn't fall in the year 300. It fell right then. Now this is one theory. There's other ways of looking at this, and many of them are worth exploring certainly. But hear me out on this. That all happens, and then pretty much immediately you have Christ coming into his kingdom, which was a physical kingdom on earth. Maybe he was more spiritual. He wasn't physically there. But in any case, you have the creation of a new kingdom, Christ's kingdom on earth, a millennial reign. So you have the establishment of what we call several kingdoms, and perhaps it was in a sense, but all kneeling to Christ. You have the Holy Roman Empire, you have Byzantium, you have the Russian monarchy, what may have been called Tartaria at some point, either sooner or later, I don't know. And so they then get to enhancing their architectural skills, their building skills. They get to building phenomenal things. They get to making more and more beautiful art, and that happens linearly. So, and into the end of the millennium, at which time Satan becomes unleashed. The saints or kings, whoever was there, perhaps they retreat somewhere with Christ, perhaps they get killed. You have Satan wreaking havoc and creating a new timeline, deceiving the world, putting a veil over our eyes, which most people haven't even considered is there. So, with a lot of these theories, people will attack you and say, well, what do you think? You're smarter than everybody. I think I think plenty of people that have the intelligence to look at what I'm looking at and come to the same conclusion. And there's a lot of people who are. But right now, almost nobody is even questioning this. And that's not for lack of intelligence. And, no matter how smart you are, Satan can put a veil over your eyes if God permits him to, as part of God's ultimate plan. And God is wise and loves us. So we could be assured that this plan is for the greater good, and perhaps is a way of testing souls that there wouldn't be without this situation. And that's in the little season, which is biblical. At the end of the 1,000 years, Satan is released from his chains. So that's our timeline, more or less. The one that we're told is much more convoluted. So you have the eventual fall of Rome. You have the sack of Rome that somehow puts cities under swamps and demolishes giant marble structures for no reason with battle axes or something. Then you have like a dark age for centuries and centuries in which almost nothing happens. You have no change in the Latin language. You have no change in customs. You have no change in culture. Then they start picking up again. They're building with the same building materials they did. They're using the same designs. And then they start building big stuff again, big Roman-style buildings. And it's credited with there's an architectural revival. They lost all the paperwork, from the Roman Empire. And then some king was like, oh, I have, this is literally what it is. It's come to my attention. I'm sitting on all of these Roman architectural works. We should start building like this. And then we're also told that these kingdoms are at war with each other all the time. And it's a brutal, terrible, superstitious period in history until that Renaissance. But meanwhile, you have incredible structures built before that, like in the year 500, for example, that we're told, in the year 700, in the year 1100, in the 1200s, some of the most beautiful things ever made. And then you have, and that's just taking the weirdness of like Europe. I'll touch on a couple other things. So you have the Renaissance. Now that we've moved on from Christ, as and Christianity as the really vital information about what it is to live, and we get into psychology and all this other kooky stuff, that's when things start getting good. And then you have the Age of Empires and the World Wars, and now we're today. But on the way, in the late 1800s, you have these buildings built in places like America that look like this. This is still here. So many of them have been destroyed, and it is one of the great crimes against humanity is destroying buildings like this. But there's ones that still are here. So Chicago Old Train Station. I was in this, had the absolute privilege of being here 3 or 4 years ago. And it looks like this. Like, look at the size of the people. We'll look at a few images of this. And there's tons of stuff like this built in America in the 1800s when there was horse and buggies and electricity wasn't common yet. And some of these things, this is Chicago, so it's not that weird, but we'll look at some in St. Louis, and it's even weirder because the population of St. Louis in the 1800s was very low. And there's photos of these buildings. There's not even a proper road. There's no other buildings around it. You're telling me that, a town of like 40,000 people is building massive marble structures before they bother cobblestoning the roads? It doesn't make any sense. So that's just part of the discontinuity of what we're told. And what I'm suggesting seems very implausible, but it solves a lot of issues. Now, one of the things, the way that I work, so I've been researching like an autistic maniac for 20 years. And what I do, this is just my style of it. People have different styles and different ways of trying to find the truth, is I just gobble up information about things that don't make sense. And I try to find something that answers. So I stumble on something that's mysterious. It doesn't vibe with my way of looking at the world. And I'm like, okay, what is this? And I learn as much as I can. And sometimes you find something where you have an answer and you have a theory and you're like, okay, I think it's maybe this. But a lot of times you don't come up with anything and you just stick that in the back of your head and you're like, okay, well, that's a mystery. I don't know. And sometimes you do come up with a theory, but it doesn't quite sit right. Or you come up with a theory and it starts falling apart later. So a theory like that is Tartaria, which is an explanation for how these buildings got here. And that was one of those where it never quite sat right with me, and I ended up discarding it. And so I've done this in a number of different directions about a number of different topics, but it's usually, the intersection. It's like what's going on with humanity and history and religion and just who are we and what's going on. And sometimes you find a theory that solves tons of the problems that you had in the back of your head. And when you do that, this is a way that people become self-assured about something that most people don't think and that they can't tangibly prove. And a lot of times people will talk about it as like, I just know it in my heart or it feels right. And I think some people are more that way. They have a better intuition than I do. They feel things. They can feel the truth. And I have some of that. I think we all have some of that. But this is essentially how I do it, is like, I'm like, well, this explains. And so like ever since I started digging into this again, like a week ago maybe, there's been a couple dozen probably things where I've been like, that's actually an explanation for that, and then that's an explanation for that. So, this is why I'm confident. Now, I said yesterday, I'm not 100% on most of this. Like I said, I believe the millennial reign and the second coming came. Oh yeah, and I get back to what changed my perspective there, and that we're in Satan's little season. But that's about it as far as like certainty. It's funny because one of the things that people say the most of who knows about is the shape of the earth. People will be like, there's no way it's flat. And then they learn enough and they say, maybe it is. And they oftentimes will say, well, who knows? There's just no way of knowing. And then when somebody says like, no, we know it is flat. We know it's level. And say, well, how could you know? Well, figuring out what you're standing on is one of the easier ones, honestly. The amount of brainwashing that's gone into preventing us from being open to the idea is tremendous. So it's hard to overcome that. But what happened 1,000 years ago is a lot more difficult to pin down than what I'm standing on right now. Even like what happened with JFK, everybody that was there is dead now. It's a lot more difficult to figure out. Well, that's not quite true, but there were people that were kids. Like, I believe RFK was alive. But you get what I'm saying. So, back to something I was saying earlier. And I see you, live viewer, by the way. Thank you for joining. Appreciate you being here. Um, I was sold on the millennial reign having happened, but I didn't know the order of things, and so I was not sold at all on the second coming. And it didn't occur to me that that would have happened before. And so people would say the second coming happened and Nero was the Antichrist. And even though I thought the millennial reign had already happened, I did not know that that would mean that the Antichrist already came, and that's part of a tribulation. So for years, I was still thinking the tribulation was ahead, and it just didn't make sense to me that some evil Roman emperor would have been the Antichrist. I was expecting something kind of more sinister and bigger. But what I was missing is I did not understand how sinister Nero was, and that when you learn about the early saints and how they all died, all the apostles, you know, Saint Bartholomew flayed alive, stuff like that. That stuff was happening under Nero, and he was ordering it, and created a tremendous amount of martyrs. And it makes sense. And like I've been at this long enough to have seen several candidates for the Antichrist kind of come and go. I don't think anyone thinks it's Bill Gates anymore. Nobody thinks it's Obama anymore. People, I guess, think it's Elon now, but I don't see him. He's acting like not that bad of a guy very well, if that's the case. So anyway, that's sort of my intro to part two. And then I guess let's just look at some more. Oh, back to, so I was saying our timeline makes more sense, and I was focusing on Europe. It answers questions about, and also I know I'm kind of all over the place right now. Yeah, we're going to look at that. Gunnar Heinzen is using he's a professor and he's using historical tools, the same ones they all use, in finding big gaps and stuff. I need I need to get more linear in how I'm talking right now. I'm too all over the place. What was I trying to say? So other places than Europe, making more sense too. So the history of Islam. You have the golden age of Islam, which ends when? 700? Or it starts at 700. So 786 to 809. But before that, let's see. Let's get an Islam timeline real quick. There's 6, 7, 800 years in which they don't do anything. They don't accomplish anything. They don't write anything down. They don't innovate. It totally fits with what we're talking about here. So, the mainstream narrative is hard to swallow. It's hard. It's almost harder than what I'm talking about. It's 570, birth of Muhammad. Now, we're gonna move that back to first century, but let's just stick with this. 570, birth of the prophet. 610, first revelation. 622, the hijra to Medina, start of the Islamic calendar. 630. This is just going to end at 6:33. I need an image. I don't know Muslim history that well. Here, now we're talking. Okay, so here's the beginning. I have my head in the way of that. Here's the beginning. Oh, this only spans yeah, I don't know. Not an expert in this, but suffice it to say, somebody could back me up who knows this stuff better. There's 600 years where they don't do anything. That doesn't tell you anything. So it does clear that up. And then at the end of Gunnar Heinzen's video, he talks about the Ashkenazi Jews and how it solves an issue with them too. It So it says, oh, and I'll do another one about Paul. So there were as there's evidence of Jewish, just Jews being in the world, writing things, doing things. So after the fall of the temple, you have the opening of the rabbinical schools. There's two of them. They're kind of two schools of thought. And people actually trace today the Zionists versus the liberal globalist Jews back to these two temples, and there are two different ways of looking at things. It's very interesting. But and they're cruising along in history, and then they're gone for 700 years. There's no evidence of them, and then they pop up again in the late Middle Ages in Ukraine area, the Khazarian kingdom and stuff like that. So that could be also the conversion of the Khazars, which is another thing I'm not going to get into now. But in any case, there's quite a lot of questions that seem to be resolved by looking at things this way. So the thing about Paul is Gunnar Heinsohn, I'll just bring him up on the camera here. This distinguished gentleman says that one of the issues in Christian history is Paul was one of the biggest figures in the history of Christianity, the early history, and that he traveled all over the place spreading the Gospels. As Christians, we know that's true. It talks about in the Bible. He's writing these letters, the letters from Paul to the Ephesians and all that stuff. Makes up a good chunk of the New Testament. But apparently there is no evidence of Paul by scholars from other cultures outside of Christianity. There's no Muslim writers who chronicle Paul, no Persian ones or anything. So, and also he was going west, so he went all the way to Spain that we know of. There's no, pre-Christian Spain, there's no writings about Paul. But there is, again, 700-800 years later, a Paul movement in these places where he was, where they follow Paul, they're followers of Paul. And so, there's all these times where we have what we're told are two separate events with centuries in between. And, the people say history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. I think this is where that's coming from. There is truth to it, where human nature being such that it is, we do the same stuff. But I think historians talk about that in a little bit of a different way. Of there's these uncanny resemblances between things, and that's where Fomenko is kind of got his start. Is he's looking at history, and he was finding that there's a king, and he raised an army, and he did some stuff, and it was dated, say, 500 BC or something. And then in a different place, different part of the world, there's a king, and he raises an army, and he does some stuff, and it is centuries later, but it's the exact same story. And he started noticing this over and over again and saying, this is it's like this. It's I don't know if you guys have seen this. Earth from space, clouds, copy pasted. It's like they copy pasted parts of history and spread it out over more time. And there's some ways of looking at this that don't involve a massive conspiracy theory. Gunnar Heinsohn doesn't believe in that. He doesn't believe in Satan's little season. He's a secular historian. But he suggests that there was a big cataclysm and people lost, there was a societal collapse and people lost everything. And so they just started counting at zero again, 700 years after the birth of Christ. It's possible. It's quite possible that some stuff like that happened. Maybe that happened for a while. We don't know what happened. The hardest part to believe of this story for me, although I'm kind of really seeing ways that this can happen, is how do you change the timeline while people are alive, like under their noses? And it's possible that that didn't happen, and that there's like a kind of more logical explanation for it, like what Heinsohn suggests. But it's also there's some very mystical possibilities as well, like the rising of the second dead, which maybe I'll talk about later. Of course, they made it. This used to pop up right away. Yeah, so this is zoomed in so you can't see it. And people will argue like, no, it's just repeating because of like, chaos math and stuff. This is the same cloud stuck over and over again. And if you have the whole thing in view, you can see that it's not blatant when you're far away from it. Let's see. Maybe I need to use Yandex. I'm kind of afraid of Yandex, honestly, for a reason that I'm not going to express at the moment. But it is more open than Google. So Earth from space. Let's see if it is. Clouds, copy, pasted. Maybe I have to put flat Earth. Real, good stuff. Well, yeah, you can find that if you look. That's the idea of what you want to. I'll give it one more shot. Copy, paste clouds in satellite image of Earth. I mean, this isn't even why I'm talking about it, or what I'm talking about, but let's see. Why is the internet stupid? Stop trying to dox me. Jeez. I hate Quora. None of these are good examples. This photo is hilarious. They say this is real. Anyway. Kathy Comby, stay. Good to see you. All right. So yeah, let's dig into a couple things here, and we'll just see where it takes us. I'm gonna watch another part of Gunner because he is straight spitting. Where's the part? I can find it from the transcript. This will just take me a moment. Yeah, this is a great spot. He talks about coming up with a blind test to prove him wrong. Here we go.
I have proposed finally to come up with a genuine blind test. So I had asked Mike Bailey to start his work on a site in which you have antiquity, 1st to 3rd century, late antiquity, 4th to 6th century, and early Middle Ages, 8th to 10th century. And you take from every strata group, you take construction timber and construction timber from here, construction timber from here, and then you send it out to 5 different dendrochronological institutes, and they don't know, of course, what they're receiving, but somebody knows what he is sending out, and they will come up with a blind test. You would expect this has been done long ago. It was never done. I have to add, though, that my proposal was a bit mean, because I made the proposal when I had already discovered that there is no such site out of the more than 30,000 that we know that has these three strata on top of each other. Thus, you cannot find any place where you can pull out a piece of wood here, a piece of wood here, and a piece of wood here, and then date it.
All right, so there I want to tell you, so as someone who got a degree in anthropology, this stratigraphy was a major thing that we learned. And it was, this is the basis of dating a tremendous amount of stuff. And recently, I've come to a startling conclusion. So they show like stuff like this where there's layers of rock, and they talk about how sandstone is created by pressure, and that so you have say the rock goes to here, and then there's people, and somebody drops a tool, and then sand blows over it, and the pressure goes down, and the tool is preserved, sometimes fossilized, sometimes half rusted or whatever it is. And that continues. And then they say you can reliably tell that the lower you go, the farther back you go. And they'll tell you that you can go all the way back millions of years. There was always something that bothered me about that, though, which was that they'd show how deep to go to get to Rome. Right? So they say, okay, we're up here at the top here. Let me find another image here. They say, okay, we're here at the top, and here is, say, let's say here's Rome, or let's say this line here is Rome. It'll often be like that, right? And like up in the middle up here, it'll be like, oh, that's from like 1400 or something, and that seems consistent. But then there's sites where they're like down here, and they're like, that's millions of years ago. And like you'd have to be so much farther, like millions of years compared, or hundreds of millions of years compared to 1,000 years is like nothing. So that used to always bother me, but I still figured, these people are smarter than me. They're figuring it out. Maybe it depends on where you are and stuff like that, but it always bothered me a bit. And they act like this is a totally concrete science, and so basically, it's a done deal. The Earth could not be 6,000 years old or anywhere close to that, and it's a done deal in terms of when metal tools are invented and all this stuff. And then you start finding more inconsistencies. So there's a mountain in Glacier, Montana. Mountain upside down. That I lived near when I was working there. That's from above. It doesn't really matter, but it's a normal looking mountain. And, we're on a little tour there, getting to know the place. And they say, yeah, this mountain is very curious because the stratigraphy is upside down. I said, what? They said, yeah, it flipped over at some point. Like a mountain. The mountains in Glacier are huge. Let's just look at Glacier because it's spectacular. We're looking at stuff like this. And it's a mountain like this, and it's like they're like, yeah, like the glaciers, whatever. It's like I don't know. But then when it really falls apart is when you have a tree going through what's supposed to be thousands of years. So let's say it's a tree through stratigraphy, and I'll just say Bible because people use this as evidence that stratigraphy is not real. And then there's the other thing. Who's that? I don't know if I'll be able to find the picture, but there's multiple examples of like trees that grow through what are supposed to be thousands of years of stratigraphy, which makes no sense. And then there's also this guy blew my mind. He's a Protestant guy. He just destroys a lot of this. Like he explains how this science is not real, and that. So I learned this from him. And he also talks about how there's also like they would find like a hammer that's supposed on a level that's supposed to be millions of years ago and stuff like that. It happens all the time. And he was also talking. Maybe that's what I was going to say. But let's see, Bible scholar, young Earth. There's a guy who's like the guy. They always make it, they just fill it with Philistines and sophists. Kathy, if you know the name of the guy that I'm trying to remember, he's like from 20 years ago, straight-laced looking guy. I'll have to find him. We'll have to talk about him another day, probably. Of course, it's like not in the first 8 pages of YouTube, because he's literally like our top guy with this stuff. Young Earth stratigraphy. Yeah, I had to work until later than usual. That's why I was late starting. And ideally I would have had all this stuff pulled up. But I didn't even know I was going to talk about that, to be fair. So anyway, so we have Gunnar here, and he's talking about that there's no layers to the Roman. There's nowhere. He said out of 30,000 sites, there's nowhere where there's Roman stuff buried, and then on top a layer of like early Middle Ages, and then on top of that, late Middle Ages. Does not exist. Out of 33,000 sites that have one of those things, none of them have them layered of all three. And what I have, the conclusion that I've come to, is that there is one way and one way only in which stratigraphy is telling you something about time. Because it never, the idea that sediment just consistently piles up makes no sense to begin with. Where is this sediment coming from? Is it coming out of the sky? That makes no sense. And there are actually only 2 times when a tremendous amount of sediment ended up. And I was gonna say like erosion also. Like, doesn't it leave a lot of times? Wind blows it away. So, but there are 2 times where a tremendous amount of sediment was dumped. One of those times is Noah's flood. You have water sweeping around everywhere, stirring all this stuff up, and the water clears out, and everything settles. And like sand that washes up on the beach during high tide and it settles, you have a layer there. So that is a way that you could look at pre-flood and post-flood based on the layers of sediment. The other time is the mud floods, and maybe, or I guess the other time would be, and this is they call a reset, the tribulation in Armageddon, where so if you have tons of volcanoes going off, ash will settle. And so maybe it's 3, but I'm definitely leaning towards this idea that the mud floods could have been that same event, and that perhaps Satan does not have the power to create floods of mud or sink buildings into the ground. So, like Satan usually does, there's some truth to what he says, but he twists it or exaggerates it or turns it upside down. There is such a thing as stratigraphy, but there's only ever been two events in which a significant amount of sediment, it doesn't come out of nowhere. And maybe there's other minor ones like major volcanoes going off where you get an inch of ash. But my understanding is before the time of Christ, there's no historical record of a large volcanic event. That these three major ones or two major ones in the first millennium were really the same one, happened in the first century. And that since then, there hasn't been a giant one. There's been some, volcanic events that have made the sky hazy, but nothing like that one time. So, I used to live in Guatemala where I could see volcanoes from my balcony. They still go off. I'm not saying that, but in terms of dumping a tremendous, like a whole layer, it doesn't happen. So things get buried. There's avalanches and landslides and stuff like that. But I'm going to stick to. What I am asserting is in terms of a major layer being deposited, two or three of them ever.
Three strata on top of each other. Thus, you cannot find any place
So then he gets
where
into
you can pull out a piece of wood here, the 4th century. Christianity, they are told, is the only major religion in the history of man that had to do without temples, without buildings, without churches for 300 years. Enigma number one, miracle number one. Then...
Right, so they say it's because they were persecuted, but they were holding, we were told, they're holding mass. So if they're doing that in a cave, we should be able to find those. Oh yeah, I should remember to do this. So please like and subscribe. God, I hate that. But yeah, two of you in here, and maybe one of you doesn't like it, but I do appreciate the support. I really appreciate you guys being here. My sister was just here. She sent me a video.
He survived the Holocaust in the United States. He was into Rome. And you see in the colors, I gave the same colors to antiquity.
Here, let's jump to here.
From these three very central cities, and look at areas all through Europe. And I'm doing this very quick because you understood the idea. This is one of the palaces of Charlemagne.
Yeah, Kathy, came across that idea yesterday that the mud flood was Armageddon. I have to look more into it because I don't know if it's possible that these buildings that are mud flooded could be that old. But there's something about that's ringing true for me.
8th century, 8th, 9th.
So these two buildings here,
and that's the building here,
are supposedly 700 years apart.
It is modeled after a building in Cologne 700 years earlier. So you say, why not? Why shouldn't they do this? But if you look at the city of Ingelheim and you ask the archaeologists, okay, this is around 800 something, what do you have deep down at 100? Oh, there we have nothing.
Of course, Kathy.
So you can see.
Have you seen this lecture before?
This is considered to be a renaissance of this building, but on the side, there's no stratum with buildings from which the people building here could have learned how to build a site so similar to Cologne.
Yeah. Amazing stuff. This guy's awesome. Unfortunately, he passed away. Oh, cool. I'm excited to introduce you to this.
We moved to England. One of the major enigmas of England is that at the time when everybody believes the Anglo-Saxons from Germany took over the island, it's dated around 400 after Christ, 5th century after Christ, up to 900. There is not even agriculture in England. There are no fields, there are no plows, there are no farmhouses. So,
these are the same people that conquered the whole world, that like
We do
They
not
couldn't
know
come up with
how
farming.
these famous Anglo-Saxon kings would feed themselves or would feed their villagers, their farmers. And I just give a few quotes. The Saxons tended to avoid Roman sites, possibly because they used different farming methods. But the Roman sites had the best soils, the best water supply. So what farming method would stop you using the best soils and the best water supplies? So the historians expect when the Romans are finished here and the Saxons are moving in here, they would use the compounds of the Romans. They would use the walls to shelter themselves behind them. They are astonished that they don't. And attempts to demonstrate conclusively significant continuity in specific urban or rural sites have run afoul of the near archaeological invisibility of post-Roman British society. So we are looking at 400, in conventional chronology, 400 to 930s. And Fowler, he quotes the evidence of the missing agriculture. In contrast to the field systems of the 500 years or so before and after Christ, there's little evidence in the ground for the next half millennium. Now, Alfred the Great is considered the most famous Saxon king. He's famous here in Poland
Saint
too,
Alfred,
because he
sir.
sent out Wulfstan to find Trozo close to Elbląg. And the problem with Alfred the Great's city of Winchester, Venta Belgarum, is that for the 9th century, when he is dated, there's nothing there. There's no palace, there are no farmhouses, there are no streets, there are not even toilets there. It's just nothing. But if you go down in Venta Belgarum to the antiquity period, so here's Alfred's period where there's nothing, here's the late antiquity where there's nothing, but if you go down here, then you have a rich stratum of houses, of palaces, with wonderful Roman mosaics, and nobody claims property of these palaces, of these houses. And I take the liberty to return this property of the palaces in Winchester to Alfred the Great, but I can only do this, of course. I can only give him a palace of 200 in the year of 900 if I cut out 700 years in between.
Yep, it's awesome. I'll throw this link in the chat. And I'm positive because this theory is really just still getting going. And, you know, massive credit and shout out to people who've been digging into this for years. I would imagine that there's, besides Fomenko and Heinsohn, other historians, whether alive now or in the past, who have been finding these same things. This is an interesting one. So this person says the Bible proves mud flood was Armageddon. And I believe there's no talking in this video. I haven't watched the whole thing. This would be a good thing just to have on in the background.
But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night,
at the beginning,
in the which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness, looking for and hasting unto the coming of the day of God, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved.
So this is an interesting thing, and this is something that until this theory I never couldn't make heads or tails of it. People talked about melted buildings. This looks melted for sure. This is looks like necessarily a building as it could be sort of carved into the mountainside. But this looks melted. Melted rock is a bizarre thing. And people find phenomena that looks like this. There's a ton of it. And I've not understood this for a long time. And some of the like Tartaria people will talk about that there is energy weapons, or they're talking about ancient Hindu mythology in which, you know, these gods are battling and stuff like that. Or other people have talked about that there's nuclear bombs a long time ago, and none of that really made any sense to me. Armageddon makes sense to me. This when God flooded the world to reset it the first time, the first reset, he then promised to never do that with a flood ever again. But he did not promise to not reset the world in some other way. And, in the Bible, we have the description of tribulation as being quite a violent and intense event. And we have these volcanoes going off. And we've got Roman buildings made out of thousands of tons of marble being demolished and ending up under swamps and stuff. And we also have this. And other than that, this looks like something like Armageddon. I don't know of anybody who's dating this to that time period. But that makes sense for this. So, that's part of why I lean towards the mud floods having been going back this far, is it just seems like there was such an intense cataclysm that, like, it could account for that too. And I have a hard time believing, like, Satan can't control, how does Satan flood the world? He can't do that. But I mean, could he help a human inventor develop an energy weapon? Yeah, absolutely. So we don't know. But the melted stuff is
shall melt with fervent heat,
bizarre. Well, there you go.
shall be dissolved unto the coming of the day of God, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat.
This is where cymatics and Starforce seem to tie in. Yeah. So here, yeah, he's going to show a bunch of melted stuff. Shout out to Golden Age Past on YouTube. Give him a subscribe. Thanks for being here, Kev. Good to see you, buddy. This stuff, like, without the biblical context, you really can start feeling schizo. It's like, what is this? Why is nobody talking about this? Love you too, man. Look at that. There's even some that are like, they're built with brick. That's something. And you can see the bricks melted. And some of the ancient stuff, the whole crew's here. What's up, David? John Levi's channel is good for exploring a lot of this. Yeah, I've looked at his stuff a while ago. I gotta go back to it. Yeah, he's awesome. It makes me think, like, there's all these things that Incan giant blocks. This stuff, I guess that doesn't really look melted, but I had the thought of, like, it looks like it could have a little bit. It doesn't look like that other stuff, but you know how, like, crazy tight so you have these odd shapes and there's, like, no space in between them. You can't slide a piece of paper in between any of them. And I wonder if it was like, it wasn't that tight, but it got hit with a tremendous amount of heat. But I don't know. What is that? Is that real? That doesn't look real, but I know a lot of this stuff is. That shit is just crazy. That's like an ancient quarry. There's some crazy stuff in, what's it called? Arches. That looks melted, super melted. I was here a few years ago, and it was like, so they'll tell you this is wind erosion, and like some of this, I mean, it's beautiful. It's an amazing place. However it happened. So I think I tend to think like a flood makes sense for this, like just a insane amount of water rushing through all of this, leaving these arches like that. It looks flowy like that. But there was a couple of cliffs where I was like, I don't see how water would do this. Like that. Yeah, no, that could be water erosion too. I don't know that I'll find what I was thinking of. Most likely softened up and put together like giant clay cubes. Yeah, that could be the ink and stuff. A lot of that New Mexico tent rocks is one near Santa Fe. Yeah. This is wild. I never looked too far into this, but I've seen it. Like an anthill. To ADD for the pace of this. Whoa, that one looks crazy. There it is. Yeah, that looked like it melted over. Petra is an interesting case. I don't know how it would relate to this, but Petra is in Jordan. And it's carved out of the rock. It looks like this. And this door only goes back like a few feet. And then there's just a giant stone block. And what they tell you is like, oh yeah, that was the whole thing. They just made the facade. And it's like, what? You sure that block wasn't put in the way and it goes in there? And then Petra has actually, that's why I probably thought of it. Petra windows also melted looking. It should have come right up. Like this. Yeah, that's like a perfect example. So, yeah, I don't know. It seems like Armageddon to me. I guess, the mud floods could have been that or could have happened later as part of the reset. I don't know. But I mentioned earlier that the hardest part of this to swallow in a lot of ways, if you already believe in the Bible and everything, is how they would do the reset. How do you add 700 years without people noticing, right? And the rising of the second dead could explain it. And it's one of the coolest, weirdest aspects to this. That there could have been nobody from the Millennial Kingdom there anymore, that they retreated or died or, went to heaven. And that the second dead, the second resurrection, which I'll read the verse from, is where then the new people came from. And it explains these, the reset people, these weird crowds of people in suits that look out of place and stuff. I guess they would have given them suits. I don't know how it would have worked. But, yeah, let's look at the Bible verse first. Did I find the right spot? I don't know that I picked the right one here. Wait, isn't it 24? Yeah. So, and I saw an angel coming down from heaven, this is Revelations 20, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, the old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. So that's when the millennial reign happened. And he cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up and set a seal upon him that he should no more seduce the nations till the 1,000 years be finished. And after that, he must be loosed for a little time. So we are here. And I saw seats, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And the souls of them that were beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and the word of God, who had not adored the beast nor his image, nor received his character on their forehead or their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. So this is saying that the martyrs during tribulation, the people who did not betray Christ during this horrific time, reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. And, you know, I mean, if they're in heaven, why is it 1,000 years? Your life in heaven is eternal. So this seems to me that they got like the resurrected bodies, because these are people who were beheaded and such, so they were dead. And I believe it says, yeah, the first resurrection. So I'll get to that in a second. But then it says the rest of the dead. So everybody else that had died in history, I guess, the rest of the dead lived not till the 1,000 years were finished. And then it's a little odd wording, because then it says this is the first resurrection, but that's referring to these guys, because it's probably made perfect sense in the original language, like the construction of it. So the rest of the dead did not live till 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection, referring to the first one. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. So it was back to those early martyrs. And these, the second death hath no power. So they ain't going to die again. But they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. Again, sounds to me like not heaven, because heaven is forever. And when the 1,000 years shall be finished, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison and go forth and seduce the nations. It certainly seems like he's done that wherever we live now. Which are over the four quarters of the earth. Gog and Magog shall gather them to battle, the number of whom is sand of the sea. And then it gets into the final battle with Gog and Magog, which has not happened yet. Somebody said something. This was, I think it was Understanding Conspiracy, his channel. Learned a lot from him. Awesome guy. His name, I believe, is Paul. Talking about how surrounding the camp of the saints, all the armies of the earth with Gog and Magog, that might not be them actually raising physical armies and surrounding the camp of saints, be that at the North Pole or what have you. It could be that we already did it. That like all the peoples of the world that oppose Christ are surrounding the center of the earth. We're all around it. So I thought that was a very interesting idea. Like, if that's true, we could be quite close to the end here. We wouldn't even need to look for a physical conflagration of armies. At the same time, there's a lot of armies in the world, and they might decide there's an alien, tell us there's an alien invasion at the North Pole or something like that. I don't know. So anyway, the part that I was getting at here is the rest of the dead being resurrected after the 1,000 years were finished. Let's see what the notes in the Dewey Rames Bible had. I've really fallen in love with Dewey Rames. It is it's a translation of the Catholic Bible that was done straight from the Latin Bible that had been used forever into English. and it does so intentionally with a eye for kind of not glossing over the old language. So it says firmament, stuff like that. I've been really loving it. I haven't even looked at any of the notes. So it says, bound him. The power of Satan has been very much limited by the passion of the Christ for 1,000 years, that is, for the whole time of the New Testament. So this is even saying that Satan is bound during the time of the New Testament, but especially from the time of the destruction of Babylon or pagan Rome till the new efforts of Gog and Magog against the church towards the end of the world. That last part seems like it's not really accounting for, I guess a lot of people thought that Satan's little season was like a very short time, not like the 250 years that we might be looking at. During which time the souls and martyrs of the saints live and reign with Christ. They're saying in heaven. It could be in heaven, could be on earth. In the first resurrection, which is that of the soul to the life of glory, as the second resurrection will be that of the body at the day of general judgment. Yeah, so we're disagreeing a little bit. This part is not scripture, though. This is Douyer-Ames' commentary. But so getting back to how do you add 700 years in front of people's faces? Well, maybe you don't. Maybe at the end of the reign of Christ, and this is not my original idea, by the way, they went to the camp of saints, all the people who, maybe just the saints who reigned with Christ, maybe all the people, maybe they left some. But then you have the second resurrection of the dead, which may have been all the people who died before Christ and didn't have a chance to know him, and in order to be saved have to believe in him and choose him freely, so that they then, we're not talking reincarnation, resurrected them and that was the beginning of the reset. And so they just kind of stumbled into a world that is 1,000 years plus later than where they last were. I guess they had died, but they get their resurrected bodies, and they are now populating the world. And so then Satan could just tell them whatever they wanted, and he could create various secret societies and say, hey, you want to be in charge of this thing? It sounds far-fetched, but we're believing in the Bible here, so it's certainly not outside of the realm of what they might have meant. What was I going to look up? I was just talking about the reset people. Let's see, 1800s city video. And people just notice that, like, people look... I don't know that just grabbing a random one is going to demonstrate anything, but... This is 1896. It's a little later than... well, this is an area that... what's his name? John Levi is on point about. So let's go to him. A little season, my thoughts from 2 days ago. Bro, this subject is hot. I gotta watch that. It's 20 minutes though. I don't know if I want to watch 20 minutes with you guys, but I'll watch it and then we'll come back to it. I'll do another one on this stuff. Let's see, probably go to playlist. I know he's got a ton of content. Antique Tech, North American Ruins, World's Fair, Ancient Civilizations. I'm not sure which that's going to be. Let's say reset. Post-reset photos. Yeah, a lot of these might be good. Yeah, the other thing is in the late 1800s, all the destruction of all these phenomenal buildings. There's a lot of stories where they were like, yeah, we destroyed it because it was like too expensive to heat or something like that. And it's like, you should get the death penalty for doing something like that. But some of them are like, yeah, there was a Chicago fire and it destroyed all these things. And, it's like, how does this... There's photos of it and there's like blocks of marble littered all over the ground. It's like, what kind of fire collapses structures that look like this. Yeah, this guy's channel is awesome. I'm excited to see what he says about the little season. Where's that? What if I reset people? This one will have some good stuff.
This city is built in 1850. What they tell us is that this fire killed 3,000 people, and it was rebuilt. But what is so baffling is that it looks like everyone in this city was wiped out. I mean, you know, there's nothing left. There's nowhere to even be. I mean, where did everyone go? They seem to leave that out. There's nothing. There's nowhere for anyone to hang out. Now, I want to look at these photos from 1850. I did a search and wanted to see if there were any photos from 1850, because if you remember my last video, there were 1,000 people in 1849. 1,000 people. So I said, okay, let's look at pictures from 1850.
Let me know if the volume's okay.
And it took me a few different places, but here's one, for example. Now, this is from 1854. 1854. And what they tell us is that this is the Roman Catholic Orphan Asylum and the St. Patrick's Church. And pretty interesting and pretty aged. But again, we could give them the benefit of the doubt, you know, that this picture that we're seeing, these are the first 1,000 people. But, you know, I'm sure if we turn this camera to the right or left, we would see a lot more, you know, just in this little image that we're seeing. Those photos before the World's Fair. And just to be sure, you know, that again piqued my curiosity to come in and look. And sure enough, we do see these images pre-World Fair. Even right here, this is pre-World Fair. And, you know, only less than 15 years after the inception of the city do we see this amazing, amazing architecture. I mean, look at this. Look at this ornamentation around this entryway with this horse statue, and I mean, this
Takes time to build stuff
this is
like
really
this.
something else. And you know, when you search San Francisco in Wikipedia, you are not going to get these photos. You know, they're not going to show you such things.
There's a building in San Francisco that I went in one time, and my jaw just hit the floor, and I want to try to figure out what building it was. But it was like Art Deco. It had green marble. It had a spectacular ornate lift. What do we call them? Elevator. And you know, it was like from 1910 or something like that. And like, it just doesn't, stuff like that just doesn't fit with like the reason we don't build like that now is because of money concerns. They didn't just have infinite money and time back then. We were supposed to think that they had a harder life, you know. Yeah, the thing with John Levi is it's kind of a vibe, you know, like he goes through slowly.
So in 15 years,
talks kind of slowly.
The mainstream narrative tells us that all
It's
of
not
this
action-packed to
was
watch
built.
and respond to.
And now this photo is showing us that in 10 years, most of what we're seeing was already here. I guess this is only proving the point that much more. Now this is getting ridiculous, you know, that we would have this in 10 years.
They built all of this 10 years after the fire?
And, you know, 15 years later, it looks like this. Although I really
What?
don't see very much difference between this and this. It's just a different angle. We're seeing a lot less in this photograph. And when we look at it in this photograph, you know, it's just absolutely amazing. Like we just saw the photos of 1860 where, you know, the city is built out and beautiful, but then we have this. I mean, the whole city is mud flooded, completely mud flooded. And what they've done is just build these boardwalks along, you know, the sidewalks so people.
Yeah, so he's showing evidence that the mud flood was more recent, was 1800s, and definitely could be sound weapon type of thing. You know, you just reminded me of was it moving walkway? This was one of the first things that I saw about this topic of sort of our past not being what we thought, where I was like, oh, okay, like, what the heck? This is Paris. Incredible. It's amazing we have these videos. Right, so this is a perfect example of like the reset people, where it's like what they're doing doesn't fit this building. You know? Like the level of what they got going on, horse and buggies. Like this is the level of something that you might expect if you transplanted people to, you know, a random place and time in the world after 20 years, you know, Europeans. They're going to figure out horse and buggies. You're going to pick up the stuff around them. But I don't know. I mean, it's very mysterious. I definitely don't know. I love this guy. Don't know that this second resurrection is what we're looking at, or that it explains this. Is that just the same guy walking by twice? Am I tripping? I guess he went by and he's like, what's this? The camera, huh? I've heard of that. Yeah, he comes back. What's Paris look like now? Not to bum everybody out. I mean, it's still beautiful. I guess they're not going to show me chimp outs, you know, on my first search. Let's see. Paris market looks like Africa. Like, what country is this? This looks like anywhere but Paris. Alright, so comparing that to this. Bizarre. Oh my god, how magical is this? I'm starting with learning about this stuff. I'm starting to have less envy for these people or the people who lived in the millennial reign because witnessing the kind of the collapse of the deception of Satan's little season, him creating this like rock solid deception and then kind of twisting the knife in us, and adding all of this crazy stuff, and there's no difference between men and women and all of that. And they're creating a revival in Christ and a revival in admiration for leaders who fought back against this in history, and a sort of re-recognition of the beautiful roots of Western civilization and of Christianity and stuff. And don't get me wrong, I mean, this looks more pleasant than this looks a lot better than what we're doing, but it is pretty exciting. There's the walkway again. It is pretty exciting. Somehow me and you guys who are watching and a lot of other people seem to be on the cutting edge somewhat of the end of Satan's season and the end of his control over us. And I think it's very cool. It suggests that it's not that we have agency, that we have, our God-given intellects and, discernment, and that there's cracks in the deception on us, and that we're sort of this isn't just we're not just passive and waiting around for God to throw him in the pit of fire, although we are, but we're not just doing that. That we can we're playing a role. I think that's very cool. So I'm going to leave it there for today. God bless you guys. Thank you very much for joining. Kathy, thanks for coming. You're the first person to come hang out live on the show that I didn't know from before, that it's not a friend that's hung out in the chat and stuff. So I appreciate it, and I will see you here and in the community. Shout out to David for inviting me to that. And God bless you guys. I'll see you tomorrow.